You are standing in the quiet aftermath of conversation that never truly happened. The air is thick, heavy with things unsaid, charged with static electricity that feels less like anger and more like a sudden, violent depressurization. You haven't raised your voice. You haven't attacked. You have simply done something far more terrifying to the modern psyche. You have stopped feeding the machine. You have withdrawn the constant, invisible scaffolding of validation that she didn't even realize she was standing on. And now, you are watching the structure sway. It begins in the eyes. Watch them. They are the first casualty of the silence you have created. Before the words come, before the accusations or the tears, the eyes shift. They dart laterally, scanning the room, scanning your face, scanning the empty space between you, frantic and unmoored. It is the look of someone who has walked into a room they have known their entire life, only to find the furniture rearranged in the dark. She is looking for the reflection she is used to seeing, the version of herself that you usually project back to her, the one that tells her she is right, she is good, she is justified. But you are not projecting it. You are a flat, dark screen, and in that lack of reflection, panic begins to bloom like ink in water. You see her posture change. It is a subtle, almost imperceptible collapse. For years, perhaps without even knowing it, she has relied on the buoyancy of external approval to hold her upright. The modern world has promised her that this buoyancy is her birthright, a constant stream of digital and interpersonal dopamine that affirms her existence without requiring her to examine it. When you stop validating, when you simply look at her with neutral, grounded gaze, refusing to nod along with the narrative she is spinning, that buoyancy vanishes. She feels gravity for the first time in a long time. Her shoulders hunch slightly, a protective curling of the spine, even as her chin lifts in defiance. It is a physical paradox. She is shrinking in fear while trying to expand in dominance. Then comes a sound, the raised voice. It doesn't climb in volume because of rage. It climbs because of distance. Not the physical distance between your bodies, but the sudden, abyssal distance between who she thinks she is and who she feels like right now. She is shouting across the canyon of her own insecurity. You notice that her arguments start to fragment. She isn't responding to what you said. She is responding to how you make her feel. And how you make her feel, by simply not validating her every emotion as absolute truth, is erased. This is the emergence of the shadow. In the psychology of the modern persona, the ego is the brightly lit storefront, curated, perfect, validated by likes and nods and acquiescence. But behind that storefront is the shadow, the dark warehouse of doubts, fears, and unexamined flaws. Usually, your validation acts as a lock on that warehouse door. You keep the monster quiet. But now that you have stopped, the door has swung open. You can see the shadow rising behind her words. It manifests in the irrationality of the panic. Why is she terrified? You're only standing there. You are only telling the truth, or perhaps simply saying nothing at all. But to her, this silence is an existential threat. The panic is not about you. It is about the sudden exposure of the self she tries to hide. She feels the draft from that open warehouse door, the cold air of her own unresolved nature hitting the back of her neck. She tries to provoke a reaction, any reaction, because even negative validation is better than the void. If you yell back, she exists. If you get angry, she is the victim and her identity is safe. But you remain in that reflective stillness. You're holding up a mirror that doesn't flatter, a mirror that only shows what is actually there. And what is there's a panic that has no name, a fear that she is disappearing because you're no longer painting her into existence. The room feels smaller now. The atmosphere is brittle. She is breathing shallowly, the air catching in her throat, her hands moving in sharp, jagged gestures that slice through the tension but hit nothing. You are witnessing the collision of a high-speed ego with the immovable wall of reality. She is waiting for you to flinch, to apologize, to restore the illusion. But you don't. You just watch, observing the panic not with cruelty, but with the sober realization that the woman in front of you is a stranger to herself, and you have just introduced them for the first time. This introduction is not a handshake. It is a collision. And as you stand there, holding the ground of your own reality, you begin to see the mechanism of her reaction churning beneath the surface. It is a fascinating, Terrifying machinery. Gears grinding against the rust of insecurity. Pistons firing on the volatile fuel of fear. You realize that she is no longer in the room with you. She has retreated into the fortress of her own mind, a place where the architecture is built entirely on the foundation of how she is perceived rather than who she is. The disconnect becomes visceral. You watch the shadow react first, bypassing the conscious mind entirely. It is faster than thought, faster than reason. Before she can even formulate a sentence, the shadow has already decided that your lack of validation is an act of war. To the modern psyche, accustomed to the constant, intravenous drip of affirmation, the cessation of that flow feels indistinguishable from a physical attack. Her body treats your silence like a predator in the tall grass. Adrenaline floods her system, dilating her pupils, not to see you better, but to find the exit, to find a weapon, to find the moral high ground even if it doesn't exist. The reflection she sees in your eyes tightens. It is no longer the soft, blurred image of a goddess that society has promised her she is. It is sharp, high definition, and unforgiving. In this tightened reflection, she sees the cracks in the porcelain, and because she cannot bear to look at the cracks, she tries to smash the mirror. This is why the accusations start to fly, wild and unrelated to the moment. She is throwing stones at her own reflection, hoping that if she shatters the image you hold of her, she won't have to look at the truth of her dependency. You observe the way her emotions move miles ahead of her logic. It is a frantic race where the runner has left the track. Her feelings are sprinting, fueled by the panic of the void you've opened up, while her logic is left far behind, stumbling, trying to piece together a narrative that justifies the sprint. She is retrofitting reality to match her panic. She feels abandoned, therefore you must be abusive. She feels small, therefore you must be arrogant. She feels unheard, therefore you must be silencing her. The mechanism works backwards. The emotion dictates the facts, rather than the fact informing the emotion. There is a tragic, widening space between her intention and her response. Deep down, beneath the layers of modern conditioning and defensive armor, there is likely a desire for connection. There is a part of her that wants to be understood, not just validated. But the mechanism intercepts that intention. It twists the desire for connection into a demand for submission. She doesn't say, "I feel insecure when you don't agree with me." The mechanism translates that vulnerability into aggression. It comes out as, "You never listen to me," or "You think you're better than everyone." You stand in that space between her intent and her response, watching the signal get corrupted. It is like watching a frantic SOS signal being distorted into a declaration of war. The tragedy is that the harder she fights to regain the validation she feels she has lost, the further she pushes you away, and the deeper the panic sets in. She is caught in a feedback loop. The panic causes the aggression. The aggression causes your withdrawal. Your withdrawal deepens the panic. The air around her seems to vibrate with the energy of this internal civil war. She is fighting you, but she is really fighting the sudden silence of her own ego. The shadow, now fully in command, is frantic to fill the silence with noise, with drama, with anything that distracts from the terrifying quiet of self-reflection. You see the exhaustion setting in behind the rage. Sustaining a false reality is tiring work. Holding up the sky of her own ego without the pillars of your validation is crushing her, yet she refuses to let it fall. She would rather burn the house down than admit the foundation is weak. And you, the observer, the witness, the mirror, simply watch the flames rise, knowing that the fire is not yours to put out. The storm does not end with a bang, but with a sudden, exhaustion-induced dissipation. The silence that follows is not the charged, static silence of the beginning. It is a heavy, settling silence of aftermath. It is the quiet of a room where the air has been sucked out and then slowly, painfully allowed to return. You stand amidst the debris of the interaction. Not physical debris, but the emotional wreckage of personas she tried to defend. The energy in the room shifts from kinetic to potential. The frantic motion of the mechanism grinds to a halt. The gears stripped, the fuel spent. You watch as the shadow begins to merge. For the last hour, it has been a separate entity, a lunging beast standing in front of her, fighting her battles. But as the adrenaline fades, the shadow retreats, sliding back into the outline of her body. She is no longer the monolithic force of modern entitlement. She is simply a human being standing in the ruin of her own expectations. The storm quiets not because the weather has changed, but because she no longer has the strength to command the wind. The artifice of the strong, independent modern woman, who needs nothing but demands everything cracks, revealing fragile biology underneath. In this stillness, the mirror you have been holding finally clears. The steam of her rage evaporates from the glass. What remains is a reflection that is stark, unadorned, and undeniable. You see her now, not as the antagonist, but as the inevitable product of society that taught her to fear silence. You see the terror in her eyes recede, replaced by a dull, aching confusion. She looks at you, and for the first time, she actually sees you. She isn't scanning you for validation or searching for a weakness to exploit. She is looking at you because you are the only steady thing in a world that just dissolved beneath her feet. The emotional distance between you, which had spanned a canyon only moments ago, begins to shrink. It shrinks not because you have moved toward her capitulation, but because she's been forced to land on the ground where you have been standing all along. This is the moment of recognition. You realize that by refusing to validate the false self, you have inadvertently invited the real self to step forward. It is a painful invitation. It stings. It burns the ego like acid. But it is the only path to something authentic. You see her shoulders drop. Truly drop this time, not in a defensive crouch, but in the surrender of weight. The tension leaves her jaw. The mask of the modern performance slides off, leaving her face exposed and raw. It is a moment of profound vulnerability. She realizes, perhaps only subconsciously, that the world did not end because you disagreed with her. She realizes that she is still breathing, even though you did not tell her she is perfect. The panic was a lie told by her conditioning. The reality is simply two people in a room, stripping away the layers of social programming to find the bone and gristle of truth underneath. This is a resolution, though it is not wrapped in a bow. It is messy. It is uncomfortable. But it is real. The resolution is the understanding that validation is a drug, and you have just forced her through withdrawal. The shaking stops. The eyes steady. The dynamic has shifted permanently. You are no longer a source of supply. You are a witness to reality. And she, stripped of the chaotic armor of her panic, has a choice. She can pick the armor back up and leave, seeking a new source of validation elsewhere, or she can stand in the uncomfortable clarity of this moment and begin to build something that doesn't require constant external propping. As the scene fades, you are left with a profound sense of sovereignty. You did not break her. You simply refused to help her break herself against the rocks of her own delusion. The storm is over. The air is clear. And in the clarity of that silence, for the first time, there is room for the truth to breathe.